And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is November 24th, the 328th day of the year. Just 37 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays and observances. Celebrate your unique talent day. Everybody's got some kind of special talent, whether you're being dumb as a brick or a brilliant pianist. Everybody's got something special. National Fairy Bread Day, National Brand Day, and a National Au Pair Day. D.B. Cooper Day. That's the mysterious figure that vanished with defiance, jumped out of an airplane with $200,000 in cash, and vanished, leaving behind an enigma that continues to captivate minds and fuel speculation. World Conjoined Twins Day, National Sardines Day. Small but mighty, these little fish are packed with omega-3 fatty acids. National Bible Week, National Tree Week, National Book Week, Artes Mundi, National Game and Puzzle Week, National Farm City Week, U.S. Antibiotic Awareness Week, World AMR Awareness Week, and Better Conversations Week. Famous people born on this date: Sarah Hyland and Katherine Heigl. Well, that having been said, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something new going on. Okay. Well, Chicago public schools have blown millions of dollars on travel expenses while students can't read at grade level. This new report from the Chicago Public Schools Office of Inspector General revealed that the school system spent $14.5 million in excessive travel expenses in FY23 and FY24. Where comes the data shows that just 30.5% of students in grades 3 through 8 were proficient in reading, and just 18.3% of students were proficient in math in the spring of 2024. According to Chicago Pastor Corey Brooks, it's a sad commentary on just how far the city's fallen and how bad the leadership is. These individuals believe spending money on themselves benefits the educational system more than spending it on the children who deserve it. And when I look at some of the things that students are learning today, and I think about some of the things we were required to learn, quite a difference. Well, the Slender Man stabber is captured after a nationwide manhunt. Morgan Gazer, Wisconsin woman convicted in the 2014 Slender Man stabbing. The manhunt for her has come to an end, according to authorities. Madison Police Department confirmed she was taken into custody in Illinois at about 10:34 p.m. last night after an intense search. She escaped after she cut off her Department of Corrections monitoring bracelet and fled a Madison group home Saturday night. Madison police announced her escape in a social media post on Sunday. Last seen in the area of Cronk Drive about 8 p.m. with an adult acquaintance. Her whereabouts are unknown as of Sunday morning. Recent image of her captured on security video from the past month was posted. 2017, she pled guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide and the violent stabbing of Peyton Leutner, but claimed she wasn't responsible because she was mentally ill. She keeps pushing that. She could wind up in Congress. Told investigators she tried to kill Leutner to please the horror character Slender Man and was ultimately found not guilty by reason of mental defect. Gazer and her friend Anissa Wire were 12 when they lured Leutner into a wooded park during a sleepover in May of 2014. They stabbed Leutner 19 times. Somehow Leutner survived the attack. Gazer's been in custody at the Winnebago Mental Health Institute for the last 7 years until she decided to do what the Australians call a walkabout. Well, Senator Lisa Slotkin said she wasn't aware if President Trump gave any illegal military orders during a video controversy. She faced questions during an interview Sunday on ABC's This Week about the recent reaction to a social media video she and 5 other Democrats made encouraging service members to refuse illegal orders. Back when I was wearing the uniform, if we'd refused orders, we'd have been shot. Well, mass thieves and South American crime ring loot American homes in a coordinated pattern, according to police. A wave of high-end residential burglaries across southeastern Wisconsin have prompted a coordinated law enforcement response and drawn political attention at both the local and the national levels. The Mequon Police Department says the burglaries share striking similarities, suggesting professional operation. The suspects, dressed in black from head to toe, their faces are covered and they wear gloves. They've entered homes through wooded backyards, often targeting cul-de-sacs or properties near golf courses. Stolen items include jewelry and designer handbags and watches and cash, and all consistent with organized theft groups that target affluent neighborhoods. The MPD, the Mequon Police Department, posted a regional intelligence sharing meeting on November 12th. Brought together police agencies from across southeastern Wisconsin to share data and identify trends. According to officials, these burglaries show the hallmarks of South American theft groups known to operate across the U.S., though no suspects have yet been identified. Investigators have observed consistent methods of entry and targeting across multiple areas. Well, Kate Middleton has extended an olive branch to Andrew, former Prince Andrew's daughters amid Jeffrey Epstein disaster. She reportedly extended quiet invitations to Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie for her annual Christmas celebration. That move spoke volumes about her desire to keep the royal family close and connected this holiday season. This claim came from a royal commentator and broadcaster, Neil Sean, says the Princess of Wales is making a deliberate effort to present a united front amid lingering controversy surrounding Prince Andrew. A therapist says he's received threats after calling President Trump the Trump derangement syndrome real pathology. He's a Manhattan-based psychotherapist, claims he's received dozens of hate messages, including death threats, and speaking publicly about seeing patients in his practice he described as experiencing Trump derangement syndrome. Jonathan Alpert, author of the forthcoming book, Therapy Nation, says he faced backlash after appearing on Fox News last week to discuss his November 12th Wall Street Journal op-ed about patients across the political spectrum who bring up President Trump in therapy sessions, not to discuss policy, but to discuss obsession and rage and dread. Well, it's Alpert shared with Fox News Digital several messages he got through text and email over the past week. Eat feces and die, you racist, fascist piece of feces. He's been called an effing uneducated MAGA scumbag, a pedophile protector. Well, there's all kinds of loonies out there. Well, Governor Newsom, who wants to be president, war on energy is crippling California and undermining the military. He traveled to Brazil, touting his failed energy agenda in mid-November. At the same time, the reality back home is unavoidable. Because of his policies, Californians are paying some of the highest gas and electricity prices in the nation. We've been crushed by Newsom's energy affordability crisis, and it's crippling the national security. Since 2018, more than 360 energy companies have left California due to the state's debilitating regulations and new oil drilling permits, fallen by 95% since he took office in 2019. He's one of those that think if you think happy thoughts, all will be better. Well, Israeli forces reveal massive Hamas route tunnel hidden beneath a UN compound. It's being called $1 million root tunnel. And it's a game changer, especially if you take it out. Israeli Defense Force released a video showing that what it describes as one of Hamas's most complex underground infrastructures extending beneath the southern Gaza city of Rafah. According to the IDF, the 7-kilometer-long root tunnel runs roughly 25 meters underground, contains 80 rooms, and was used for command operations, weapons storage, and sheltering Hamas operatives. Video shared on X, November 20th, travels through reinforced concrete passageways and large chambers. Shows the sophistication and scale of Hamas's underground network. According to the Israeli military, the tunnel originated beneath the United Nations Relief and Works Agency compound and stretched beneath a number of civilian sites. It's, if they could just harness all that enthusiasm for a good cause. Well, Watchdog Group has warned an AI teddy bear discusses sexually explicit content and dangerous activities. It's a $99 Kuma bear powered by ChatGPT. It discusses spanking and BDSM and even offered instructions on how to find knives. Well, researchers from this consumer watchdog group said they discovered that an AI-powered talking teddy bear was capable of discussing inappropriate subjects, including sexually explicit content and instructions for finding dangerous objects. You know, when I was growing up, if our teddy bear said anything, it was out the door and in the trash can. Well, a Kennedy cousin tied to a murder, the murder of Martha Moxley. Breaks his silence 50 years later as the murder remains unsolved. 50 years after the daughter of a wealthy Connecticut family was found murdered in the yard of her quaint suburban home, questions remain surrounding the involvement of a Kennedy relative who was convicted of her killing, but ultimately walking free after the guilty verdict was overturned. Michael Skowkel, cousin of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., spent 11 years in prison for the 1975 murder of Martha Moxley. But since his arrest in 2000, he's maintained his innocence, and he's now speaking out for the first time in a new NBC News podcast entitled Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley Murder. We have a lot of unsolved murders in this country. It's fascinating how many are actually unsolved. Well, reggae pioneer Jimmy Cliff is dead at the age of 81. He was a reggae star and an actor. It's according to his wife on his official Facebook page, it was with profound sadness she shared that her husband Jimmy Cliff had crossed over due to a seizure followed by pneumonia. And she thanks his family and friends and fellow artists and co-workers who've shared his journey. To all his friends around the world, please know your support was his strength throughout his whole career. Well, let's see what else we got. Well, Marco Rubio claims there's been tremendous amount of progress in the Ukraine peace talks after the Geneva meeting. Following a round of talks with a Ukrainian delegation in Geneva, Rubio told negotiators had a very good day. He thinks they made tremendous progress, even from the last time that he made a statement. We began almost 3 weeks ago with a foundational document that we socialized and ran by both sides and with input from both sides. So we'll see if the Ukraine war actually does come to an end. Well, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy identified the woman set on fire on a Chicago train as 26-year-old Bethany McGee. Suffered severe burns in the attack. He blasted the city's lax crime policy, saying the attack, carried out by a career criminal with 72 prior arrests, never should have happened. He said it's devastating a career criminal with 72 prior arrests is now accused of attacking a 26-year-old young lady on Chicago's L train and set her on fire. This would never have happened if that thug was behind bars. But Chicago, that's the Pete offenders roam the streets. He said Chicago's carelessness is putting the American people at risk. No one should ever have to fear for their lives on the subway. I remember when we lived in New York City, we saw a lot of strange people on the subway. In fact, we even reported a man who tried to pull a gun on us going down the stairs to the lower level. And of course, as soon as we reported it to the subway police, he said, "Which way did they go?" And I said, "They went to the left." So they ran to the right. That evening, somebody got on a train with a gun and shot a bunch of people, and we were called in for an interview. But of course, they never caught anybody. AOC of Tennessee says she hates the city she's now running to represent in a clip that's come to light. There's a lot of people who should never should be elected who are running for office. Mike Johnson says the House GOP is working full steam ahead on President Trump's affordability agenda. Making life more affordable for Americans is a key part of House Republicans' remaining agenda for this Congress. In an interview for Fox News, the leader of the House of Representatives acknowledged there was a short amount of time for lawmakers to be in D.C. before the end of the year and said they'd be working toward a number of goals, including President Trump's affordability agenda. He said there's a lot of initiatives left on the table, things for us to do in a short amount of time to do it in. But they're bullish about the idea that they're bringing forward over the next few weeks. It'd be nice if they could reduce the cost of living. Well, DoorDash breach has exposed contact information for a lot of customers and workers. They confirmed there was a data breach that exposed personal details for a mix of customers, delivery workers, and merchants. The stolen information included names and email addresses and phone numbers and physical addresses. The company said it was no evidence of fraud tied to the breach, but the event still raises concerns for those who use the service. There's a lot of people with too much time on their hands who attack various online systems. I had an email, actually a website breached. Well, the new Arctic discovery could deal a massive blow to Chinese dominance in the rare earth minerals field. The project's been heralded by Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy and accelerated by President Trump, and it stands to deal a huge blow to China's dominance in the nanotechnology, energy, and automotive sectors as the Graphite One site near Nome uncovers vast reserves, which P. King previously accounted for 90% of production. As of 2024, the U.S. was at least 93% import dependent on both rare earth elements and graphite itself. But that may be coming to an end. Well, Jessica Alba stuns in a patterned bikini while reminiscing about her time in beautiful Australia. She wore a brown and white pattern string bikini in those pictures, paired with vintage-inspired sunglasses. This mother of three lounged in the sand for a selfie, and there was another posing with pals while standing in the ocean. Now, a lot of folks say Australia is actually beautiful. Well, boxer Vanes Artuyasane competed for Team USA in the 2004 Olympics, has died at the age of 39. He's a former Olympic boxer who competed professionally in the light middleweight and middleweight divisions. Battled skin cancer for 2 years before his death. Born in Armenia, but moved to Glendale, California when he was young. Started boxing at the age of 7. Went on to become an 8-time national champion and Golden Globes winner. Well, it's recommended for those Thanksgiving dinners that you go to. Don't show up empty-handed. Take a gift. Well, 50 kidnapped Catholic school students in Nigeria escape as some schools have been offered to be closed. 50 to 303 students kidnapped from a Nigerian Catholic school on Friday have escaped their captors and now reuniting with families. Students ages 10 to 18 escaped individually between Friday and Saturday, according to the Most Reverend Bulus Dwala Yohana, chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria in Niger State and the school's proprietor. A total of 253 students and 12 teachers from St. Mary's School are still being held, according to Yohana. Says we're able to ascertain this when we decided to contact and visit some of the parents. Officials didn't provide details about how the children escaped or where the remaining students or teachers are being held, but supposedly it's being quietly worked on. Well, there's a new weight loss shot that's showing major fat reduction, but experts, of course, urge caution. It's an experimental medication shown to help boost weight loss by up to 20%. Eloralintide, once legally injectable, manufactured by Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, led to meaningful dose-dependent weight loss, according to adults who were overweight or obese but didn't have diabetes. Drug is generally well tolerated by the study participants. Well, a federal judge, one of God's anointed, calls the Comey indictment into question, asked if Halligan is a puppet for Trump. Apparently, the judge has Trump derangement syndrome. This federal judge grilled the Department of Justice Wednesday about whether it mishandled the grand jury indictment against former FBI Director James Comey and asked if interim U.S. Attorney Lindsey Halligan, who's leading the case, acted at the behest of President Trump. Judge Michael Nachmanoff found during the hearing in Alexandria, Virginia, that Halligan signed an indictment alleging 2 charges against Comey, but that document was never fully presented to the full grand jury. That revelation could imperil the case if Nachmanoff decides it's enough to delegitimize the indictment. Nachmanoff directed Halligan, who turns out has no prosecutorial experience before Trump put her in as to lead the Eastern District of Virginia in September. He called her to come to the stand, gave her a chance to speak for the first time in the courtroom since her appointment. Well, James Carville has demanded Democrats ditch performative woke politics and embrace economic rage. A Democratic strategist James Carville demanded Democrats start embracing a platform of economic rage, a New York Times guest essay published Monday. He wanted the party to leave performative woke politics in the past. He says it's time for Democrats to embrace a sweeping, aggressive, unvarnished, unapologetic, and altogether unmistakable platform of full economic rage. It's the only way they might start winning again. Well, according to Andrew Zimmern, a James Beard award-winning chef, affordable menus and smaller portions need to be offered by restaurants. He says Americans are being priced out of good food as restaurant prices climb and portion size stay massive. Combination, he warns, could spell disaster for diners and independent restaurant industry. Yes, used to be able to have 2 people go to dinner for under $50. Now, if you get under 100, you're lucky. Well, Mondami has pledged New York City is going to remain a sanctuary city after he has a friendly meeting with President Trump. He vowed to keep the city's status an immigration sanctuary on Sunday, just days after he had his meeting with the president. He said they didn't see eye to eye on the issue, but he was adamant it was going to be a sanctuary city. Well, President Trump says those against tariffs serving hostile foreign interest, the full benefits yet to be seen. The full benefits not been realized because the impact's been blunted by stockpiles of goods amassed to avoid paying the tariffs, but he suggested these stockpiles are dwindling and the full force of his tariffs is going to take hold soon. And Southern colleges see a massive influx of Northeastern students seeking sunshine in the Greek life. The rather than chasing the Ivy League dream, a lot of students now opting for schools in the Southeastern Conference that consists of 16 schools. Folks are getting tired of the politics found at the Ivory League level. All right. Well, we've been talking about a lot of topics. We just finished talking about UFOs. You know, this past Saturday, the 22nd, was the 62nd anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy. He was, of course, killed in his motorcade in Dallas, Texas. He was in the presence of his wife and the governor of Texas, John Connally, was sitting in the front seat. Connally was also wounded. 2 hours later, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the new American president. You know, I've done a lot of research and written a lot of materials about the Kennedy assassination. One of the things that came to light that I found fascinating was before the bullets were fired, and yes, there was more than one bullet fired, Vice President Johnson, who was in the car behind, scrunched down so he would not be a easy target. So apparently, it's believed, he knew something was going to happen. Now, after the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald left the Texas School Book Depository where the shots were thought to have originated, went back to his rented room, changed clothes, and started walking down the street. He was stopped en route by Officer J.D. Tippit, and allegedly Oswald pulled his revolver and shot Tippit on the spot. Shot him 4 times. And then Oswald walked toward the Texas Theater, went in without buying a ticket. Police were called, and even though the assassin of the president was being searched for, they sent officers to investigate somebody going into a theater without a ticket. And according to the story, Oswald tried to pull his pistol to defend himself, and it misfired, and he was tackled and wrestled to the ground. Now, after his arrest, Oswald claimed he didn't know anything about the assassination and he was a patsy. After being questioned, he was taken down to the basement of the police station to be put in the car and be transferred. And Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, walked into the heavily guarded basement and shot Oswald. Well, Lyndon Johnson, allegedly in a effort to answer the country's questions, convened the Warren Commission, chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Warren didn't want to head up that commission, but Johnson literally ordered him to. Now, the Warren Commission issued its findings over a year later, claiming that Oswald shot the president, had no accomplices, and all the shots were fired from the depository, and that Oswald had distinct communist leanings. Now, most Americans didn't believe the conclusions and felt the government was concealing the truth. In fact, as a reward for his participation, Gerald Ford was appointed vice president to Nixon and eventually became president. Mainstream American media, of course, endorsed the government narrative, and on each anniversary, the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, and the 40th, most networks sponsored specials and said conspiracy theorists were paranoid and misguided, and government renderings of the event were essentially correct. Well, a number of Warren Commission apologists also came out to buttress the tale. Gerald Posner wrote a book called Case Closed, Vincent Bugliosi, Reclaiming History, and the Commission's most recent courtier, Bill O'Reilly's Killing Kennedy, all endorsed the findings of the Warren Commission. Now, despite the propaganda and all the carrying on, a lot of people didn't accept the conclusions. Warren Commission member Hale Boggs, Senator John Sherman Cooper, and Senator Richard Russell had serious reservations about the finding of the Warren Commission. In fact, Hale Boggs actually disappeared. President Charles de Gaulle, Kennedy's personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, believed he was killed as a result of a conspiracy. After being barred from the autopsy, Kennedy's own personal physician, Dr. Berkeley, decided a conspiracy was involved. Governor John Connally, who was shot along with Kennedy, was asked if he felt Lee Harvey Oswald fired the gun. He said, absolutely not. I don't for 1 second believe the conclusions of the Warren Commission. Kennedy's aides, Dave Powers and Kenneth O'Donnell, both of whom were present at Dealey Plaza, thought the report was phony. Veteran Secret Service officer Gabby Kellerman said the same thing. Well, there's been a lot of books written over the years about the Kennedy assassination. One called Coup d'etat, the assassination of President Kennedy. A book came out in 2003 called Conspiracy in Camelot, the complete history of the assassination of President Kennedy. It was an academic enterprise, had over 800 footnotes, all covering evidence for and against the Warren Commission's report. There was a theory the mafia was behind the assassination. That was thoroughly investigated. And there were quite a number of theories, of course. There's been a number of podcasts. Now, when we attempt to put the entire cornucopia of conspiracy theories into a single story, we end up with James Files, convict number N14006 in the Stateville Correctional Center in Joliet, Illinois. He's serving a life sentence for murdering a policeman. He was a former loyal associate of Chucky Nicoletti, a senior mafia figure. He claims he was the Grassy Knoll gunman. He was paid $36,000 to carry out that hit. He's been interviewed numerous times. Now, there were over 50 witnesses who said the shots came not from the depository, but from the Grassy Knoll. Despite that, there are a lot of folks in the last 50 years who confessed to be the assassin. And in fact, in the book Conspiracy in Camelot actually listed 20 possible assassins who were in Dealey Plaza that day. A railroad worker who was in a tower actually watched the Grassy Knoll gunman. He later was killed in a one-car accident. Now, Files, when he was interviewed, answered most questions without any hint that he was making things up. He was either extremely well versed in conspiracy literature, or he was actually telling the truth. Now, according to what Lyndon Johnson told his mistress, Madeline Brown, the day before the assassination, after tomorrow, the Kennedys never embarrass me again. Now, the combination of John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson was not a happy match. It was not a match made in heaven. In fact, when Kennedy ran for re-election in '64, he planned on replacing Johnson. And Johnson, of course, was extremely upset when he found that out. Now, there are many who believe that Lyndon Johnson, frightened his political career might be over and he might face imprisonment on corruption charges, was the architect of the plot to kill President Kennedy. Now, naturally, the two did not like each other. One of the last decisions Kennedy made before the trip to Dallas was Johnson would not be running for re-election with him as vice president in the upcoming 1964 re-election. Now, Johnson, and this was a lot of evidence supporting these findings, had been involved in a number of questionable events that were now coming under scrutiny. In fact, his close associate, Bobby Baker, was under investigation for corruption. Another pal, Billy Saul Estes, who I've got to know at several book signings, was also being investigated. And the inquiries into the wrongdoing by these two men was getting ever closer to Johnson himself. His Bobby Baker's case expanded in scope and intensity. He remarked to a friend that his testimony could make Johnson spend the rest of his days behind bars. And as a consequence, Johnson left Washington to stay out of the limelight. He remained in Texas for a few months before the assassination. He felt the Kennedys manipulated these emerging scandals in order to use them to get Johnson off the 1964 ticket. Now, Johnson, who was better known as LBJ, believed that Robert Kennedy had an arsenal of data accumulated about these dealings. He saw his political career coming to an end, and he was deeply embittered by his association with the Kennedys and their complicity in these accusations against him. And the Kennedy brothers, for their part, referred to Johnson as Colonel Cornpone and his wife, Little Porkchop. Now, Johnson's mistress, Madeline Brown, and Johnson did have a number of mistresses, apparently, over the years, reported he said to her the night before the assassination that after tomorrow, Kennedy never embarrass me again. That's not a threat, that's a promise. So that gives a lot of evidence supporting the fact that Johnson knew something was going to happen. Now, indicting Johnson for the assassination is not an original idea by any means. A lot of researchers have proposed Johnson as the mastermind behind the plot to kill Kennedy. Philip Nelson, Joseph Farrell, Mark North, Barr McClellan, Craig Zerbel, and Roger Stone, and some of the writings I've done address Johnson. But there's no way that Johnson, by his lonesome, could have pulled off a plot of this magnitude. Now, there are four sympathetic current and former CIA functionaries, Allen Dulles, Richard Helms, James Jesus Angleton, and William Harvey, who many say aided and abetted Johnson's plan, either in an active or a passive mode. By active, it's meant that these gentlemen were bona fide accomplices in the planning of the assassination of the president. By passive, we mean that they merely engaged in cover-up activities, obfuscation, secrecy, and destruction of documents, acquiescing to plans and plots rather than serving as co-architects of these plans and plots. Certainly, of every agency, the CIA was most likely to have the resources that Johnson would need to carry out an assassination. Now, Senator Richard Schweiker was the chairman of the Church Committee, one of the committees that looked into the assassination of President Kennedy. And he said in no uncertain terms, in my judgment, the CIA was involved in the murder of the president. To Senator Schweiker, these CIA personages were more active participants, but when you search through over 60 years of research, you just can't be certain that their participation was unambiguously active rather than simply aiding and abetting Johnson's plans. Now, when President Kennedy took power, Allen Dulles was the director of the CIA, and he was a right-wing Republican hawk. And he hated both Kennedys. He once said that little Kennedy thought he was a god. While head of the CIA under JFK, Dulles boasted at a dinner party he was still carrying out his brother, John Foster Dulles' foreign policy. He said, that's a much better policy. I've chosen to follow that one. When President Kennedy was told about Dulles' remark, he erupted. Dulles did help orchestrate the Bay of the Pigs invasion of Cuba, privately assuring President Kennedy CIA-funded expeditionary force would be sufficient for the job, and of course it failed because Kennedy wouldn't back those troops up with more direct American involvement. He had promised air support, which was not forthcoming. Many years later, it was learned that Dulles had deliberately misled the president into thinking the CIA-backed force of anti-Castro Cubans could succeed on its own. His real intention was to get the president mired in an inescapable situation that would force him to follow up with American forces. He wanted another Vietnam in Cuba. Well, Kennedy refused, much to the anger of the Cuban exile community in the U.S. and much to Dulles' surprise. He was simply not used to being overruled by anybody, to include the president. He'd long served the government with his brother under President Eisenhower and was quite accustomed to running things any way he wanted to run them. Well, in September 1961, Kennedy fired Allen Dulles from his position with the CIA because of the disastrous outcome of the Bay of Pigs invasion. One Dulles appointee, Richard Bissell, is credited with numerous attempts to assassinate Castro using such things as poisoned ice cream sodas and poisoned cigar and poisoned seashells on Castro's favorite beach. All happened quite against President's wishes and without his knowledge. In addition, Dulles refused to testify with respect to whether individuals suspected involvement in the assassination were connected with the CIA. He wanted nothing to do with investigating Kennedy's assassination. Dulles once even prepared a plan for a preemptive nuclear first strike against the Soviet Union. Kennedy felt that idea was sheer madness. And Dulles' hatred for Kennedy was, in fact, legion, and numerous conspiracy researchers believe he was a more active participant with Johnson in the assassination, particularly a film made by Oliver Stone, author Robert Morrow, New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison. If you remember, Garrison opened his own investigation into the Kennedy assassination. Richard Helms, the second CIA official implicated in this particular theory, was the director of clandestine operations for the CIA under Dulles. Later became director of the CIA himself. He was once convicted of contempt of Congress for failing to disclose information about CIA operatives, mafia-related activities connected to the overthrow of Castro, and even CIA-sponsored commando raids into Cuba directly in opposition to Kennedy's policies. Well, the long list of cover-up activities associated with Helms is actually impressive. One document allegedly authored by Helms and Angleton speak of having to cover up for E. Howard Hunt's presence in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. In another incident, Helms withheld evidence from investigative committees that Jack Ruby had ties to mobster Santos Trafficante. New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison, as I said earlier, did his own investigation into the Kennedy assassination, attempted to unsuccessfully indict a number of individuals for the assassination, and he accused Helms of withholding information on CIA ties in at least two of his witnesses. Helms is alleged to have plotted the murder of Castro just a day before Kennedy was shot, and quite in violation of Kennedy's orders to have the CIA stand down from such activities. And Helms has been linked to disinformation activities regarding the JFK assassination as well. According to James DiEugenio, another Kennedy researcher, Helms is the highest link in the chain of assassination plots against Castro. Other researchers have linked Helms more directly to the JFK plot themselves. The third CIA conspirator in the conspiracy is James Jesus Angleton, who was the head of the counterintelligence in the CIA. Like Dulles, he detested President Kennedy. He was associated with myriad cover-up activities, destruction of documents related to the murder of a presidential mistress, as well as missing documents regarding Oswald's alleged trip to Mexico City. Angleton, to his assistants, also believed to have covered up CIA files on Oswald, according to author John Newman. Angleton presided over a fiefdom of 200 people directly under his authority, all sworn to secrecy, and that he was the one that they looked to. After the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy sent a secret emissary, William Atwood, to begin discussions with Castro. Very few people knew about that. He was accompanied by Lisa Howard, an ABC correspondent. Both Howard and Atwood played the role of media people, when in fact both were on a secret and personal mission for Kennedy. Howard even went to bed with Castro and then shared her pillow talk with the president. Throughout these exchanges, both JFK and Castro developed an increasing rapport. Kennedy proposed the U.S. would recognize the Castro regime in return for Castro's promise not to export his revolution elsewhere. According to Atwood, who has been interviewed recently, in regard to these extremely delicate talks, there's no doubt in my mind if there had been no assassination, he would probably have moved into negotiations leading toward normalization of relations with Cuba. Well, Kennedy thought only 6 people in this country knew about his secret initiative with Castro. Unfortunately, he was wrong. Angleton had bugged the apartments of Atwood and Lisa Howard and learned of Kennedy's negotiation with Castro and the proposed entente. Passed this information on to the anti-Castro Cuban community, which was absolutely enraged, convinced that Kennedy was actively betraying their dreams of returning to Cuba. According to journalist Seymour Hersh, Angleton was known to loathe Kennedy, whom he came to regard in his alcohol-fueled paranoia as an agent of the Soviet Union. Does that sound familiar, folks? Some researchers believe Angleton was intimately involved in the assassination plot against the president. When Hearst interviewed him about his role in the assassination, he remarked, "The mansion has many rooms. I'm not privy to who struck John." Hearst said Angleton was basically laying off blame on somebody else, and the whole purpose of the conversation was to convince me to go after somebody else and not him. Also, that he was a completely crazy, to use the expression used by the investigator. Angleton wanted to convince everybody he was a completely crazy old fart. In addition to these three CIA bigwigs, William Harvey, another high-level CIA official, had direct access to Lyndon Johnson, according to E. Howard Hunt's deathbed confession. Harvey was a boisterous, porcine alcoholic who had a passionate dislike for Kennedy, and, according to a friend, hated Bobby Kennedy's guts with a purple passion. Well, Harvey's role in the CIA was to liaise with both Corsican and American mafiosa for clandestine black ops. Harvey's close friend with whom he dined on vacation was noted American mobster Johnny Rosselli. And so close were these two that Harvey's daughter referred to Rosselli as Uncle Johnny. It's thought that through Harvey, the mafia was conscripted to join in the plot to kill the president. Harvey's close friendship with the mob wasn't confined to Rosselli, though. He was a regular contact with mobsters Santos Traficante and Sam Giancana, as well as with anti-Castro Cubans like Eladio Del Valle. A lot of authors have endorsed the mafia theory of the assassination. Most notable, Jim Mars and Professor Robert Blakey. Leading mafia conspirators were Santos Traficante, Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcello, and Tony Accardo. The mafia side of the conspiracy is rendered as, and this is based on James Files' admissions. Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the U.S., was aggressively prosecuting mob figures during his first 3 years of the Kennedy presidency. He's responsible for close to 700 successful prosecutions. The mafia was under siege because of it. And the mafia, particularly Sam Giancana, thought of itself as tight with the Kennedy family. It was Giancana's largesse that helped secure the vote for Kennedy in Chicago and West Virginia. And he also helped to provide the president with Mistress Judith Exner Campbell. Yes, President Kennedy had quite a number of mistresses himself. So the mob was deeply puzzled at Robert Kennedy's behavior. Giancana secretly taped Robert Kennedy to try and find out why he was pursuing with such vigor, despite all the generosity the Chicago mob had shown to both Jack and his father. In fact, the Chicago mob plied Jack's father, Joseph Kennedy, with a regular supply of women. She also had a number of secret dealings with the mob, one of which involved dealings of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and other notables in securing gambling properties in Lake Tahoe. J. Edgar Hoover got wind of Joe Kennedy's mafia dealings in 1961. He gave this information to President Kennedy. In turn, the president showed information to his father. Joe Kennedy promptly had a stroke, never fully regained his faculties after that date. As a result, the Kennedys never fully forgave Hoover. In a book written by Giancana's brother called Double Cross, Sam Giancana comments on his secret recordings of Robert Kennedy. He said, Bobby was gotten on wire calling Giancana Guinea greaseball. Can you believe that? My meals were good enough for him, weren't they? The votes I muscled for him were good enough to get Jack elected, and now I'm an effing greaseball. He smiled, his eyes narrowing into small cobra-like slits, and said, I'm going to send him a message he'll never forget. Well, according to the story, Traficante, Giancana, Marcello, and Accardo, collectively decided if they assassinated Bobby Kennedy, the president would avenge his brother's death, destroying him with all the powers of the presidency behind him. So they decided to kill the head of the snake instead. Then Bobby Kennedy be neutralized by the death of his brother. So according to what Sam Giancana told his brother, we took care of Kennedy. The hit in Dallas was just like any other operation we worked on in the past. The U.S. had a coup. It's that simple. The government of this country was overthrown by a handful of guys who did their jobs very well. Only one American ever knew it happened. The FBI's J. Edgar Hoover had wiretaps showing a mafia plot to kill the president was in the works. According to a book entitled Act of Treason by Mark North, there were numerous examples. One wiretap after the murder of Benjamin Lewis reveals that it teaches the little effing Kennedy who runs Chicago. And another one, Carlos Marcello says, don't worry about that little Bobby SOB. He's going to be taken care of. The dog will keep biting if you only cut off its tail, but if the dog's head is cut off, the entire dog is going to die. And Santos Trafficani said, mark my word, this man Kennedy's in trouble and he'll get what's coming to him. He's going to get hit. Well, Hoover didn't tell his boss, Robert Kennedy, about his intelligence. He disdained for RFK knew no limits, all of which led author Mark North to discuss Hoover's silence on his issues as actual treason. So ultimately, the agreement was forged between Johnson and CIA compatriots and the connection between William Harvey and mobster Johnny Rosselli. Rosselli was enlisted to bring the mob into the equation, and the Mafia conspirators were only too happy to join with Johnson to carry out the crossfire assassination plan in Dealey Plaza. And this group was what was known as the High Cabal that engineered a brazen coup d'etat in the United States of America on November 22nd, 1963. The head of it, of course, was Lyndon Johnson, and it was Dulles, Angleton, Helms, Harvey, Rosselli, Giancana, Marcello, Trafficante, and Arcardo. But there was a second-tier candidates as well who brought Johnson, the CIA, and the Mafia elements together besides Harvey and Rosselli. I'm talking about David Ferry and David Atlee Phillips. Ferry, a pilot and a homosexual pedophile, was involved with anti-Castro Cubans, and the CIA and Marcello knew Orleans underground. And Ferry's hatred of Kennedy knew no limits. David Atlee Phillips was a quiet, deep-cover CIA operative, thought to go by the cover name of Maurice Bishop. Even Kennedy's newly appointed director of the CIA, John McCone, who took over from Allen Dulles, didn't seem to know about him or his activities. Phillips was actually one of the most mysterious figures in the Kennedy assassination. James Files alleges Phillips choreographed the events in Dealey Plaza and was the CIA's control officer. He also helped in the setting up of Oswald. Phillips kept his silence throughout all the many inquiries about the assassination, but on his deathbed, his estranged brother James called him. He asked him if he was in Dallas during the assassination. Phillips broke into tears and said he was, and his brother promptly hung up the phone. It's believed that through Ferry and Phillips, the parade route was passed along from Johnson through Harvey and Rosselli, and the hit squad was organized mainly through the Chicago Syndicate. In addition, Oswald was deceived and put in place in a depository to serve as the patsy by these same individuals. And no library card was found on Oswald. There was a rumor he had Ferry's library card in his pocket. Ferry was in a frenzy to retrieve it from Oswald's landlady in order to cover up his tracks or any trail that might connect him to Oswald, and went to see her to try to find it. But besides Ferry and Phillips, there are other players as well. Oswald moved to New Orleans and had a few low-paying jobs there. He was engaged in rather bizarre behavior. Started the Fair Play for Cuba committee that boasted 33 members, when actually there were no other members than himself. Picketed in front of an aircraft carrier, passing out Fair Play for Cuba brochures. Had a brouhaha with an anti-Castro Cuban that got a great deal of publicity. Both he and the Cuban, Carlos Bringuier, were arrested. Later, Oswald appeared on TV debating the cause of Cuba. Well, the Warren Commission used this information to make its case that Oswald was a communist sympathizer and to establish a motive for killing Kennedy. Researchers have found a bounty of information that contradicts this scenario, though. Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba brochures had an address on Camp Street that was the same as the address of a right-wing anti-Castro person named Guy Bannister. Bannister is a former FBI agent and also worked with the CIA, known for his skill in getting people up to infiltrate various left-wing groups. This was Bannister's specialty, and it appears he was grooming Oswald for just such an activity. When Bannister's secretary, Delphine Roberts, asked what Oswald was doing there, he was told he's with us. Roberts had seen Oswald in Bannister's office on a number of occasions. CIA spy master E. Howard Hunt also had offices in that same building and also be seen with Bannister. And through Bannister, a lot of anti-Castro Cubans also came through. Notable among them were Sergio Arachio Smith and Loran Hall. According to author Jim DeGiunio, Smith knew virtually every important person: Ferry, Shaw, Bannister, Oswald, Carlos Quiroga, Emilio Santa, likely Howard Hunt, and David Phillips. Smith was associated with the CIA virtually from the moment he left Cuba, a CIA agent who was connected to the Bay of Pigs along with Ferry, and was likely involved in the setting up of Oswald. Well, when you add up the names of people Oswald putatively associated with in New Orleans, you get the picture. Oswald was a bizarre duality. On the one hand, he was establishing a public profile as a pro-Soviet, pro-Castro advocate and agitator, when in fact he was associated with and in contact with individuals with the exact opposite intentions. Right-wing, hawkish, anti-Castro, and anti-communist with deep connections to the CIA and some like Ferry and Hall linked to the Marcello underground. In fact, Oswald's public brawl with Carlos Bringuer where both was arrested, seems at first glance to have been clear evidence Oswald was on one side of the issue. He was a pro-communist, pro-Castro Jacobin, where Bringuer was on the other. But appearances can be deceiving. Previously, Oswald had visited Bringuer's store and left his Marine Corps manual there with a message he was interested in offering a fight against Castro. According to Bringuer himself, Oswald then expressed support for the Cuban cause and offered either to help train men to oppose Castro or to go to Cuba himself to fight. In other words, there's evidence that's been accumulated. Oswald wanted to be an anti-Castro warrior, and his curious right-wing association in New Orleans corroborates this rather vividly. This is all quite a bit earlier than any assassination plans being developed for Dallas, and the parade route hadn't yet been determined. Instead, Oswald, through his New Orleans association, believed he was to become involved in some mercurial anti-Castro event of some sort, and his pro-Castro image was being the head of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, appearing on TV, debating the Cuban cause, and passing out pro-Cuban literature in front of an aircraft carrier. All would be used to deflect attention away from his real intentions. He was actually cutting his teeth in a new role and didn't know exactly what he was to be involved in, but believed he was going to be onto something. Told his friend Adrian Alba that this was his pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Well, on that point, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be talking more about the Kennedy assassination tomorrow. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.